I have openly and constantly identified as a communist. And, I was expecting pushback for this, obviously, but I anticipated most of the pushback would be from, neoliberals, self proclaimed capitalists that don't own any capital, victims of the Red Scare propaganda. But that's not who I get most of the pushback from, actually. No, I get the most pushback from people that are supposed to be aligned with me. They say, I'm not a real Marxist. I'm not a real communist. I clearly don't know what I'm talking about. And I don't know, man. It's kind of annoying. And I would be lying if I said it didn't somewhat, get to me. But anyway, this video is not really to talk about the naysayers or give them any more attention than they're already looking for. But no, this video is for all the good faith actors out there watching my content who want to learn more about not only my personal ideology, but, communism in general, socialism in general, in the context of our modern day America. And I also want to answer some pressing questions about myself as well as the topic at hand. Like why not call myself a socialist and how I feel about democratic socialism, things like that. So that's the main focus of this video right here. So in order to go any further, we need to have some clear set definitions of some key terms going forward. Just so we're all on the same page. And for many of you who are new to this field of leftism, you can get a clear definition of what these words mean. Socialism, in its simplest terms, is a political and economic system where the workers and the masses control the means of production. Means of production being the factories, the land, the resources, the means of producing things. And the people hold on to this power through governments and cooperatives. So basically, it's collective ownership of everything that is currently owned by the billionaires, the corporations, and the government. Since that's pretty vague, there is variations of socialism. One that you commonly see today in American politics is democratic socialism. And democratic socialism, in its essence, is supposed to be mixing socialism within our currently standing democratic process. However, do I want to say majority? A large portion of democratic socialists that, self-proclaimed democratic socialists today are actually social democrats. Imagine a progressive Democrat who accepts capitalism and thinks capitalism is something that can be reformed. So if you really want to find out the key difference between a democratic socialist and a social democrat, just ask the person their stances on capitalism. If they acknowledge it can't be reformed, they're more likely to be a democratic socialist. And if they want to reform it, social democrat. So to put it simply in my own thoughts, I like democratic socialists and I'll continue to work with them moving forward. And nothing anybody says is going to change my mind on that. Social democrats, however, I have to draw the line with because I can't in good conscience with my beliefs actually work towards anything productive in my mind that with anybody that doesn't reject capitalism and its contradictions. So that's just my stance on that. Then there's more revolutionary socialist beliefs which hold that there is no reform to be had and the system needs to be changed immediately. Then there's communism, the thing I identify as personally. Communism is a stateless, classless, moneyless society where people control the resources and distribute them as needed to everyone else. Communism, by this very definition, has never been achieved before. So to say it's never worked isn't really accurate. For example, unicorn jousting has never worked because it doesn't fucking exist. Unicorns don't fucking exist. So you can't say something doesn't work if it's never existed. So despite China identifying, well, the ruling party in China, the CCP identifying as communist, the country's not even close. Then we got Marxism. Marxism is a theory developed by Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. It's not a system like socialism and communism. It's a framework for analyzing history, the economy, and the class struggle. A key part of it is, historical materialism, which is basically just, the Marxist theory of history. It views the thing that's driving human history as, the means of production, as described earlier, the land, the resources, the tools used. And if you look at history, yeah, things really do move in the terms of the means of production. Like, for example, Mansa Musa, the kingdom of Mali at the time was known for its gold. And a lot of other kingdoms around that time are also known for the resources they provide. And along with seeing history through the means of production, it also sees it through who exactly controls the means of production. Since the class struggle is formed by whoever holds the power. See, it's completely anti-capitalist, as it points out many of the contradictions of capitalism. You know, like main one, like how capitalism generates all this wealth concentrated to a few people on the top, leading everybody else to suffer and struggle. It also believes that the working class will inevitably overthrow the capitalistic system and replace it with a transition to socialism, and then eventually transition from socialism to communism. So when you see a lot of Americans today, you know, being more comfortable with the word socialism, but not communism, it's supposed to be that way because socialism is the transitionary step. So even though I am a communist because I acknowledge that as the end goal, I am still in essence also a socialist because I see socialism as a necessary first step to communism. Therefore, that means socialist policies is what's important to push for at this very moment. Hello, all. This is me in the editing phase. I just thought I would interject here since we're going to talk about Lenin. When I first teased the episode, many of the anarchist subscribers of BGR were concerned seeing a picture of Lenin. And I'm just here to say that once again, BGR is a Marxist program that's willing to work with anybody who is anti-capitalist. That includes democratic socialists, that includes anarchists. We don't have to agree on everything. I know I don't necessarily agree with much of anarchism, but I respect it and I see you guys as allies. So no, I'm not going to advocate for any harm or discreditment of your beliefs. So no need to worry about that. Anyway, back to the video. All right, it's about that time. Let's talk about Marxist-Leninism. I do align with a lot of the Marxist-Leninist beliefs to an extent, and I'll get into more of what the extent is later. So basically, Marxist-Leninism, you know, is like the theory developed by Lenin. And the reason why it's important to address now and why it's still relevant in Marxist spaces today is no matter how you feel about Lenin, I think he is inarguably the most effective socialist leader we've ever seen in history. There's a few other answers I'll accept as, you know, like good arguments, but I think Lenin is the most effective overall. You know, he got shit done. Anyway, the core premises of a Marxist-Leninism is fairly simple. It doesn't believe that the working class will reach class consciousness on their own. Therefore, we need a vanguard party that is actively pushing for this class consciousness to be achieved. You know, which is like a disciplined, centralized group of revolutionaries who are pushing for this change. The best example that I have on top of my head, which I made a video about before, was the Black Panther Party, as they were also a Marxist-Leninist organization, which many people don't really know. And I know a lot of people are very scared of the vanguard concept, especially those who are new to leftism and are still, you know, hesitant on calling themselves Marxist-Leninists or aligning those beliefs. But when you really think about it, right, there already is two vanguard parties existing right now. The Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention quite literally function as a vanguard party, just not for the working people. They're vanguards for the ruling class. So you really don't have a say in the National Convention chair of both parties. You don't have a say in the party policies. You don't have a say in the party priorities. You can't advocate for those two parties and reject the vanguard party at the same time because that is a vanguard party. Another key thing about Marxist-Leninism is that reform is impossible. The state must be seized through revolution. And to do so leads to another word or phrase that scares people away is, you know, the dictatorship of the proletariat. And it's seen as necessary in Marxist-Leninist beliefs because it helps the state transition to socialism. It's there to squash any anti-revolutionary movements and retaliation that you will see in a revolution. And I mean, when you say the word, you know, the word dictator is there, but it doesn't have to be a dictatorship. I'm not saying it never is a dictatorship, but it doesn't have to be a dictatorship. It can quite literally just be, you know, a worker ran state. So a critique I have about Marxist-Leninists or like Marxists in general, which is probably why they don't like me that much, is many of them follow the writing of anybody as scripture and they see the theorists as prophets. So in the context of Lenin specifically, we shouldn't follow everything he said and did verbatim for a multitude of reasons. Do I think the Marxist-Leninist framework is probably the most effective thing for achieving revolution in America? Yeah, I do. But that doesn't mean we can just copy and paste the theory into America and expect it to work the same way it did for them. Even Mao made tweaks to Marxist-Leninism to match the conditions of China at the time, which is how we got Maoism. So to achieve a Marxist-Leninist revolution in America, we would need to do the same thing and tweak it to match the conditions of America today. So what exactly would need to change in this circumstance? So first, let's talk about the American Marxist-Leninist vanguard and what this could possibly look like. So for starters, it wouldn't be a dictatorship. Once again, it would just be focused on leadership, organization, and movement clarity moving forward. So the vanguard in question would just be, the most committed and skilled organizers and messengers and other actors for achieving the revolution. And they'd be chosen by the people and also held accountable by the people. So there'd be no opportunity for any bad actors to seize the power and cause this dictatorship that people fear so much. And I don't know, in my personal opinion, guys, I think the current rising of right-wing authoritarianism and fascism we got going on right now is a bit more terrifying than the hypothetical potential future dictatorship that could happen if we succeed in revolution. I think I'm more afraid of the reality than the potential future that can be avoided. That's just me. It also wouldn't be, this weird secret committee or anything like that. It would be something of transparent leadership. And I think to make it, an American vanguard party, it would have to utilize some of the pre-existing forms of local leadership we have going on today through, town halls, churches, regular community leaders, things like that. We should really focus on building the vanguard on those currently standing leadership traditions we have. So a vanguard party in America would need to avoid any forms of elitism, secrecy, and authoritarianism that would make people associate it with it being a dictatorship. Let's talk about the American material conditions. So, like, for starters, what exactly is the current American proletariat, or for better words, the current American working class? So, the United States is a very unique country, I'd like to say. We don't have, peasants or a massive industrial worker class. So, what specifically makes the American proletariat today different from ones we see throughout history and throughout the world? So, I think if we were going to aim to liberate certain workers, it'd be in these particular fields, being, logistic fields, which, deliveries like Amazon, UPS, things like that. Service and gig workers, so, restaurant workers, Uber and Lyft and things like that. Healthcare workers, of course, educational workers, workers of marginalized communities, Black, Latino, Indigenous, and immigrant workers, since they are, disproportionately exploited by the system. Workers who are professionals, they went to school and they have incurred debt because of the system. So whether that be, like teachers I mentioned before, or like any, young professional who, despite the job they went to school for and how hard they work, they will be in debt for a long time, possibly for the rest of their life. I know some might disagree with this. I think I would argue we don't really have a middle class at this moment really anymore. I would really look at it more as it's pretty easy to fall under whether you're part of the ruling capitalist class or the working class. And how I divide that is with it's between those who rely on their labor, their direct labor to survive, and those that don't. So, there's specific issues with American capitalism. We got the wealth inequality, which is obscene. It's actually insane. We have various crises with healthcare, housing, education, climate. We have issues with the way our government uses our money, which we will discuss a little bit later. And we also have a two-party duopoly, which is hell-bent on upholding this system, even if it kills us all. So for a American socialist revolution, we would need to represent the entire diverse working class and leave no one behind. Let's get a little bit deeper into the specific contradictions of American capitalism. So, while it's clear that most of the issues I just named earlier are direct consequences of capitalism, there's a lot of people that either don't believe it or still don't understand how. So, let's break down the contradictions a bit deeper. Let's look at capital versus labor. So, despite our wages being, stagnant, corporations have somehow managed to get skyrocketing wages and skyrocketing profits. And, that money should be going to us, right? Since we're the ones doing all the work, but it's not, and it never will under this system. Then there's social production versus private appropriation. It's our collective labor that creates this wealth. And the lazy freeloading billionaires who have done nothing to earn this wealth that we've earned, that we've worked for, are the ones hoarding all of it and giving us nothing but crumbs. Then there's, expansion versus market limits. See, something I said before in other videos that a lot of the capitalists with no capital got mad at me for is I stated that capitalism requires infinite growth. So to do so, corporations must expand outputs, cut any extra costs they can and take over markets. They don't have a choice in the matter. It's either they do that or they get, destroyed by the competition. The working class, who happens to be the main consumers of these companies or for these companies, they're the ones who get their wages cut when the corporations need to cut costs. This will lead to, wage stagnation, layoffs, and people not getting the bonuses they are supposed to. If the worker can't afford to buy the product they literally made, the market shrinks. So what exactly does this look like in practice? Well, you see companies produce, an excess of housing and food, well, a surplus of housing and food, and we can't afford either of them because, nobody can afford housing at this rate, and groceries are continuing to get more expensive. And also, to keep the system afloat, debt becomes a necessary part of it. We take loans, the corporations take loans, the government takes loans, and it doesn't really solve the problem. Just kicks the can down further down the road. To put it directly, this contradiction is exactly why you are currently in this Sisyphus type of debt where no matter what you do, no matter how hard you work, you can't pay it off. It's just back to working until you can pay it off, and it's never going to end. It's why you hear about economy booms and you'll never experience it or feel it yourself. It's why banks and billionaires get bailed out when things go wrong with your money, by the way. And when you need any form of support from the government, they tell you to go fuck yourself. Then there's development versus destruction. See, capitalism has this drive for innovation, which then, leads to a lot of, development. So what exactly is the cost of such development? Well, one of the costs we all know a little too well is, the climate crisis. Fossil fuel dependence is the main thing driving the climate crisis. And also, climate disasters hit the working class communities as well as the homeless communities the hardest when they happen. Then other costs are the public health crisis or crises. Like the opioid epidemic that's fueled by the pharmaceutical companies' profit demands. I mean, come on, guys, who think's getting the money for that? Then there's infrastructure decay. Something that I'm sure many of us Americans know way too well. One of the richest countries on the planet, and yet somehow our infrastructure looks more similar to the victims of our imperialism. We got shitty roads despite the constant road work. Fix the fucking roads. We got bad water systems. One of the main my distrust for the government when I was younger, Loki started with the Flint, Michigan water crisis. You could tell with public transportation, because I must say, putting it lightly, our public transportation system as a country is a complete disgrace when you compare us to other countries. Absolute disgrace. We should all be ashamed. Well, it's not our fault. Never mind. It's a travesty because, they would rather dish out money to corporations, to billionaires, to Israel, to anybody else before they decide to fix the country for us. Then there's worker burnout. They don't think about the stress placed on all these workers for the increased need of, for the development, because all that solely falls into the worker. The corporations themselves and the higher ups within them are not bearing the burden of this. We are. Socialism is a path for development that actually benefits us along with preserving, the environment, focusing on our survival, our ability to thrive, and sustainability. Capitalism does the opposite and essentially nosedives us to our destruction for the cost of, for the sake of development. So I mentioned what the American Vanguard would look like, in practice, but how would it look to build this vanguard? You see, once again, it's important because even Lenin understood that we won't reach revolutionary consciousness on our own. We tend to align more with reformism. And, I myself am guilty of that because I still deep down, wished that reformism was enough to fix the problems we have. But I have long since abandoned those beliefs. So we need a vanguard today that's focusing on delivering key things to the people. A big one is education, which is, in this context, the ability to deliver important socialist, Marxist theory to the people in plain term language. And a lot of people don't want to hear this, but when you look at the literacy rates in America, you'll begin to realize that delivering this in an understandable way is not a option. It's a necessity. And if we don't do so, we're not going to get shit done. We should also connect the Marxist education into lived struggles. explain things that we go through today in the lens of Marxism. It's very possible. The Vanguard Party should also, obviously organize, whether that's through unions, tenant movements, mutual aid networks, community organizing. These are all things I've mentioned before in prior videos. You guys should be no stranger to this. And then there's defense, which I'm gonna go a little bit deeper into than the other ones. We need to build community defense against repression. See, COINTELPRO absolutely destroyed the Black Panther Party. The federal government likes to union bust when it becomes a threat. And obviously, we had to deal with the Red Scare as well, because some people are still pushing Red Scare propaganda, even though they weren't even alive when it was a thing. And the issue is, with those three things I named, they're all things that have started for like a long time ago at this point. But not only are they still relevant today, but the government back then is far weaker in comparison to the government we have today. We have a fully developed, absurdly funded surveillance state. So community defense and things like that, it becomes far, far more important for any successful revolutionary movement today. So how do you counter anti-revolutionary moves in America today? Well, there's the legal ways, bail funds, lawyers that are willing to support the movement, and just knowing your rights, knowing when to shut the fuck up and not speak, being careful. Then there's the digital way of it, like OPSEC, like encrypted communication. And the big one, which I keep telling people on the Discord, stop Fed posting. Do not Fed post. Everything you say online, you need to imagine being in a room with two federal officers with a printout of what you said on there. Be careful, seriously. And everything does not need to be said. There's obviously direct community defense through physical patrols, like the Panthers used to do. And another main thing I think is necessary for these safety movements is to be as decentralized as possible. Because something that we should all have learned from the Panthers and a bunch of other revolutionary movements, it is incredibly easy to snuff out a centralized movement. All you gotta do is kill the leader, and then it's done. Fred Hampton got killed, and we haven't been able to get anywhere near as an effective a Rainbow Coalition since then. One leader is not as decentralized as possible, or else they'll get killed. The last step I think this Vanguard Party should be acting on, which is also gonna be another longer category, is agitation. So the first way of doing this is to seize the media. So right now, I see the media in two separate forms, which is, the traditional media, the news, which is more controlled by liberals, liberal capitalists. And then there's new age media, like the podcasts and things like that, which are being absolutely dominated by the right. A quick little thing about traditional media. We now more than ever need a left alternative to traditional media, because they are clearly showing that they are fucking cowards and will bend over to whatever Trump says. Jimmy Kimmel had the most tame take about Charlie Kirk I've seen. The most tame take I've seen. And his show got pulled indefinitely for, like, he didn't say anything that crazy. And if ABC is willing to cave to Trump and Trump's government that quickly, there is no we need traditional news alternatives, because they're not going to be an avenue for free speech or for pushing anything related to the movement. Which is why I more think it's important to focus on the new age independent media, which is currently being dominated by the right. So of course this looks like, more left-wing content, like left podcasts, left streaming, overall more social media presence. In the long run, I would love to see some actual replacements of traditional news. Like, I don't know, guys, I think a socialist New York Times would be kind of dope. Socialist CNN, pretty cool. But beyond just simple media, the movement also needs to do a job with utilizing and reshaping American culture. So what I mean by this, so one of the main reasons why I think Marxist-Leninism in America will have to be shifted is because of the aspects of American culture that you're not going to get too far if you reject. So instead of rejecting it, we just reshape it and re-aim it. So for example, overall, we got to destroy this illusion that capitalism equals freedom, because that's what many Americans believe. So how do we do this exactly? Well, an idea I had for a while now is that we start reframing. I'm sure it's not just my idea. I'm sure somebody way smarter than me came this way earlier, but we reframe American socialism as the new American dream. Everybody can have a house or a home of any kind. Everybody can have a job. Basic resources are easily accessible, like food, water, and utilities, free education, public transportation that actually works, because what we have right now is the illusion of freedom. A socialist America is an American dream that has real freedom. We also need to frame American socialism as like the successor of previous American movements, like slave abolition, civil rights, labor struggles, indigenous resistance, and populism as well. Not in populism in a cool left-wing way, not a cringe, edgy, racist right-wing way. We also need to make socialism feel cultural, not just political. That's something I've seen the right succeed a lot with now, because there's hella right-wingers that are pushing Nazi talking points and don't see themselves as political. That's crazy. So socialism should feel like a cultural thing, not just a political thing. And that would be done through, art, for lack of better words, apolitical media. So like media that's, ran by people that have socialist beliefs, but they're not actively pushing for socialism. They're just tolerant of it in those spaces. And, memes, of course, is a popular. Memes is a slippery slope. I see some of this shit y'all post in the Discord. It's a slippery slope. This would also need to focus on, forming a mass movement, because we need to gather as many Americans as humanly possible. And I think the best way to do so is to, advocate socialism as a direct solution to the struggles. Make it seem like the obvious solution to the labor struggle. Make it seem like the obvious solution to housing and tenant struggles. Make it seem like the obvious solution for representing marginalized communities. Make socialism seem like the most logical step for liberating these groups. Make it seem like the most logical way of achieving true climate justice and protecting the victims of the climate disasters to come and that have already happened. Along with that, we should be aligning with existing organizations and movements that already seek and have worked to liberate the working class. There's a whole long list of them, and I've already stated in previous videos, joining any one of them is a good thing to do. To put it simply, socialism absolutely needs to seem like the most logical step. I was talking a little bit about, political engagement. This is the part many people get misunderstand me, whether purposefully or just whatever. But let's talk about electoralism one more time. I've never once viewed or advocated for electoralism as the solution to our problems. It's not the pathway of our freedom, obviously. But it does serve some key purposes. It can have the potential to alleviate some of our suffering. I know you guys, I personally don't like reform either, but I can't sit here and act like Zoran Mamdani winning will not be good for the people of New York. It will be good. I understand you guys don't think he's left enough, and I'm prone to agree, but don't sit here and act like the things he's doing is not at least a little bit of a victory for the working class. So that's one good reason to run. And then it also, puts the movement out there. I didn't actually know the PSL even existed until 2024 during the presidential election. And give me a break. Like I said, I wasn't fully identified as a Marxist until rather recently. So give me a break. But I'm just saying, campaigns like that do actually work for exposure, at least from my personal experience. So then in that case, right, why do I even advocate that people run as Democrats? Well, for starters, let's, I'm not going to be mean. I'm just going to be logical and straight up. Half the fucking country votes for Democrats. Half the fucking country votes for Democrats. Half the fucking country votes for Democrats. So if you want to reach people, right, would it not make the most sense to go there? Imagine in 2028, right? A full, not just a regular Democratic socialist, right? A full-blown fucking socialist somehow manages to run the primary and get enough good polling data to actually qualify for the debates. And on primetime TV during the Democratic debate, there is a fucking socialist there. You're telling me that's not a win? That is the exposure I think we can benefit from greatly. And, back to the power to alleviate the working class. I have my ideology because I want to help people. It's not just that I think it's true. I want to help people. I want to help the American working class and the working class all over the world. That is why I have the ideology I do. You can help people with those democratic positions, guys. You can. The actual problem with running as a Democrat, right, is instead of pushing for socialism, most of the progressives who make it into the party, they bend for the liberal elite. I'm not denying this. Literally, AOC and Bernie Sanders are like are on the thumbnail of my video titled "The Democratic Party Can't Be Reformed" because I acknowledge this. And many people think that joining the running as a Democrat means that you inherently have to bend to the party. No, believe it or not, I actually think it's a conscious choice. I think it's a conscious choice, whether that's made out of fear that you won't win or any other thing. It is a conscious choice to run as a Democrat and bend over for the party. You don't have to do it. I mean, you can excuse doing this if you want to win and you say, okay, I don't want to be too aggressive against the Democrat. I'm trying to win their primary and win the general. That's one thing, right? But there's no excuse once you're an established member of the party for not advocating for straight up socialism and saying, man, fuck this party. We can do, the American people deserve better. You can do it. It's an option. All right, that's enough about the Democratic Party. What about third parties, right? So, my opinion, right? If ranked choice voting or a similar system that allows someone outside of the two-party duopoly to win is available in wherever you're running for, then run as third party. That makes sense. If you live in a safe blue area and you can garner enough support from the blue voters there as a third party, then run as a third party. But beyond that, I can't rationalize running for a third party. And I know, like I said, I acknowledge the whole running as a third party as a third party to bring awareness. And I already said that the PSL did a good job, at least for me, for that. But in the context of the Green Party, which you guys are saying, no. Sorry, guys, I don't like the Green Party. The Green Party has been doing their best to bring attention to the party for as long as I've been paying attention to politics since 2016. Probably as long as I've been alive, actually. And it's gotten nowhere. Like, I don't know. I remember when in 2024, I constantly got hit with the, trust me, bro, all we gotta do is hit the 5%, bro. Trust me, but we're gonna hit the 5%. And then the election came out, and I don't even think they hit 1%. Not even 1%. Because, the key difference with the Green Party running and PSL running is the PSL does not promote this delusion that they can actually win. Because they know they're not going to win. They know this. The Green Party tells their voters that they will win, and I don't agree with that. That's delusional. If a Green Party candidate can win a governor race or any U.S. House, U.S. Senate race, I will delete every single video I have criticizing the Green Party. That's not even a joke. I'll do it. Every single one. And I'll issue a retraction. I'm so confident because it's never going to fucking happen. If the Green Party was serious, which I'm sure it is in certain places, they'd be running for local office because, they can actually win that. But at a federal perspective, it's completely unserious. So then another question I received a few times when suggesting people run as Democrats if they're socialists is why shouldn't a socialist in a red area run as a Republican? And the reason why, right? If any other Republican, if the MAGA movement never happened and a normal Republican was the president, then yeah, I'd advocate for it. But the MAGA movement has absolutely killed any form of normal conservative we ever had. They saw the growing populist sentiments in their right-wing spaces, and they funneled it into, instead of hating the elites that are causing these issues, hating a bunch of groups like minority groups and blaming the issues on them. And, they somehow managed to bamboozle half the country into thinking a billionaire pedophile actually cares about them. So, no, I don't think any socialist can win running as a Republican for the same reason why I criticize Kamala Harris for trying to appeal to the Republicans. Because why the fuck would they settle for MAGA light when they can get the real thing? They're not going to. So you're not going to, most Republicans are not going to go over to a some form of right-wing socialism, They're 10 toes down for their party. However, you can absolutely pull Democratic voter away from the current spineless, ineffective, bitch-made Democrat liberals we got in office right now. All right, let's wrap this up. This is pretty long. So why socialism? Why communism? Why Marxist-Leninism? Why anything? Because to me, it makes the most sense. It has a rather proven track record depends on what you're looking for. And if achieved in America, it will, liberate the American citizens as well as liberate the victims of our imperialism abroad. Speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about international solidarity. I know somebody's going to ask about that. Let me just address that here. While I prioritize discussing America, and I always will because I am an American, it doesn't mean we should say fuck everybody else. It's not. No, that's not the way we're going to do these things. See, a key characteristic of an American socialist movement, in my opinion, needs to be staunch staunchly against imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. The ruling class doesn't only feed off of our American suffering, but it also feeds off the suffering of the proletariat all over the world, the globally oppressed. So destroying systems of American capitalism and imperialism would liberate us as well as them. So in our movement to promote international solidarity, there's a few things I think we have to do that are like non-negotiables. We need to oppose U.S. military intervention. We need to oppose the funding of other imperialist American allies. And we need to stand with the global South in any way we can, whether that's Gaza, that's Sudan, that's anything, anywhere in Africa, anywhere in Latin America, anywhere in Asia, the global South. We need to advocate for them and utilize because while we are struggling, we do have a privilege as Americans. We need to utilize that to advocate for their right to self-determination and their well-being. My mission is simple: is to liberate the American people, from systems of oppression and exploitation that are caused by capitalism and corrupt politicians. That's my mission. And to get there, we need to build a unified left coalition, which I discussed before, and I want to make a video about later. Let me just talk about that a little bit here. While I definitely push for more Marxist-Leninist aligned tendencies here, I actually am, like I said earlier, willing to work with any form of person that is anti-capitalist, also anti-racist and anti-imperialist. I'll work with anybody. I don't think there is a one road leads to revolution. I just have my opinion on which one I think is the best. But I'm willing to support anything that can yield results and anything that aligns with staunch anti-capitalism, because we're on the same side at the end of the day. But I still think the best way of doing so is a disciplined vanguard of, educators, organizers, agitators, and defenders. Not people who are holding power over the people, but who are representing the people and fighting for their needs. To all the haters, oh yes, the naysayers, he's not a Marxist, he doesn't know the fuck he's talking about, he's a loser, his videos suck. I understand your frustration. I had to put myself in your shoes to understand your frustration. And I get it now, I think. How dare this dude, in only 2 months of, existing on the internet, as far as we know, blow up this quickly? How dare he make any form of video helping people understand Marxism and push them further left when he knows less theory than I do? How dare he? You don't need to be jealous of me or spew hate in my direction, just because you don't like me or my ideology or the way I push it. If you don't like what I'm doing, right, there's a couple options, really. You can not watch what I say. You can not watch my content. You can make your own fucking content. In fact, I'm not stopping you from making your own content. I literally said we need more left content, right? So if you don't like what I made, make some fucking content. I'll literally promote it if it's good. Tag me. I never claim to be an expert on Marxist theory, and I never will claim to be one, nor will I ever actually be an expert on Marxist theory. I don't intend to be. I intend to learn more, obviously, but never to be to the point of being an expert. Why? Because I don't need to be. I am an effective communicator, as it is. That's my purpose. That's my role in this. So, yeah, my goal is to make the ideology more digestible to the average American and make it seem like common sense. And yeah, the best way to do that is to learn more theory. But I don't think attacking me, and obviously criticism is fine. I practice self-criticism every day. I'm fine with regular good faith criticism. But to watch my content and say you're not a real Marxist is that's not good criticism, because you're not saying why. You're just making a blanketed statement. And I don't know. I don't like that shit. I said what I had to say about that. I'm gonna keep doing me. I have to go on. Oh, I just kicked the fucking camera. But if you enjoyed this video, be sure to, like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to support the BGR mission in any other way, the best way of doing so is the paid Patreon and Substack. There's a lot of other benefits for subscribing to that, and that's the best way of making this whole mission of mine sustainable. So consider supporting that today if you can. Tiers start at $1. Stay tuned for what's to come. I actually don't have any announcements of what's coming next. There'll be a new BGR podcast episode on Monday, and I am looking into writing a bit more on Substack. I kind of been in the platform just a little bit. I'm gonna start making our articles on that platform. I just don't know what day they're gonna come out. Thinking about Wednesday. But yeah, that's it for now. Thank you guys for watching and peace.